Our host, the world-renowned Christine Enville, an IFBB professional, 3 times world champion, a mentor, an icon, and of course, a founding co-owner of the best supplements money can buy, International Protein. In this podcast, we discuss hormones and how a specific diet can dramatically control fluctuations, balancing moods and saving marriages. We ask Christine if this diet is a good option for high-performance female athletes and bodybuilders, and whether hormone fluctuations tend to get in the way of people's training. Lastly, we also ask Christine what hormones are affected by exercise and why. Christine, several episodes ago, we discussed something called the zone diet, where you sort of mentioned it very briefly, but you wanted to go away and do some real research on it. And from what I understood is it's a diet that balances your proteins, your carbs and your fats, and it levels out your hormones. Is that right?
Pretty much. So in a nutshell, every meal is balancing your protein, fat and carbohydrates. It also brings those nutrients from specific types of foods. It's like all carbs aren't created equal, or all proteins aren't created equal. And it essentially, it reduces inflammation in the body. So a lot of disease states, inflammation is the signal that there's a problem. So it removes those disease states and removes that inflammation. So overall, it's essentially designed to improve your health. And that's everything from, heart disease, joint inflammation, anything that is basically saying that your body's aging or in a disease state or not functioning properly. The whole basis of the diet is to eliminate that state and obviously, cause you to live healthier, live longer. It was founded or discovered or created, whatever you'd like to say, by Dr. Barry Sears. I think it was in 1985. So it has been around for about 35 years now. And I first came across it in, I think it was like the late 90s. When someone gave me a book, the Zone Diet, and I followed it for a year. And yes, it is very technical. Now, the reason I followed it was because I'd done a number of years of competitions on my traditional, low fat, moderate protein, high carb diet. And I was finding that I was kind of hitting a plateau where the same changes in my diet weren't getting the results that I wanted. And I kind of believe that does happen, like with anything, if you follow the same thing for a long period of time. Like if you only do bench press, flies and pec deck or something, and you only do that for forever, you come to a point where you need to do something different to get a change. So this is the same thing with my diet. I realized that I needed to do something a little bit different, and I read up on it and I thought, okay, this is worth trying. The fact that, now 35 years on, I think it has gained momentum, gained popularity, and I think he's simplified it a lot more because it was very, like I say, it was quite difficult to kind of figure out. So I'll kind of talk through how it structures to start off with. So essentially it starts around the protein, and he works out how much protein you need based on, one, your lean body weight. So again, if people are chronically obese, maybe weigh 300 pounds, he doesn't count that 300 pounds. He kind of, sometimes you might do a body scan, or you might do a guesstimate that, okay, maybe they have 150 lean weight pounds on them. So that would be your starting point. Now, then the amount of protein that you need is then based on your activity level. So he recognizes that a sedentary person maybe only needs like a 0.5 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and a very, very active, so like a bodybuilder or, triathlete, or someone who's doing, professional sport, or even, training, 7 days a week, that person would count their protein requirement at 1 gram per pound of body weight, and then obviously everywhere in between. So once you've worked that out and you work out what your factor is, your exercise factor, so if you're 0.5 of the 150, that would mean you need about 75 grams of protein per day, which for some people, they consider that is quite low. And then what the on-flow of that is because the protein and the carbs and the fats are all linked, then that's linked to calories. So if you do have a low lean body weight, like lean body mass, and you're not very active, it's essentially saying that you don't have a high metabolic requirement. So the calorie and your total calorie intake is linked to that as well, which to me makes total sense. But it probably means that someone who maybe is 300 pounds with not a lot of lean body weight and not very active, it probably means that they are supposed to be on quite a small amount of food. So that's just kind of put that out there. Now with So how it works is that when you get that, he breaks it down into saying food is put into blocks. So he'll count a food block. So 1 block of protein is 7 grams of protein. 1 block of carbohydrate is 9 grams of carbohydrate. Now that's the carbohydrate minus the fiber. He doesn't include the fiber in that. And the fat block is 1.5 grams of fat if you're using animal protein. And now I would also kind of clarify that means a standard meat or something with a typical fat level. If you're using a protein powder, which has, virtually got no fat in it, or if you're using, fish, a non-fatty fish, or if you're using chicken breast, not chicken thigh, then you actually count a block of fat as 3 grams. So that's essentially, once you add all of that up, it comes to roughly 100 calories. So if you're looking at your protein requirement and you're saying it's 75 grams for that person, let's say it was 70 grams, just because it makes my maths a little bit easier. You then say, okay, if there's 7 grams of protein in 1 block, you divide that 7 into 70, and that means you need 10 blocks of food per day. So then you structure your meal around that. So I know when I was doing it, I was up around about the 20 blocks of food per day that I was eating. So what that means, he then says, break that into 5 meals. And they need to be roughly equivalent, but generally it would be like 3 larger ones and 2 slightly smaller ones. So if you had 20 blocks, you could easily make that 5 meals of 4 blocks, but you might end up having, say, 5 blocks and 3 blocks. So 3 meals of like slightly larger and then 2 meals of slightly smaller. But it's a personal preference around that. For a bodybuilder, we kind of like to keep our meals fairly equivalent, or I know I did. I didn't like to have that, that's why they're called meals and not snacks, because we would have meal 1, meal 2, meal 3, because they're all roughly equivalent in their calorie count. I would like to keep mine around about the same. But if it's a person who's not, and a person who's like traditionally eating, people do tend to eat a larger breakfast, a larger lunch, maybe a larger dinner, and then have like a morning and an afternoon tea as a kind of a snack. But if you're an athlete, I think you really should be kind of, making them quite even. Maybe having your night meal a little bit lighter in calories, and maybe you're having your lunch and your breakfast or your pre-training a little bit higher. But overall, I think you try to keep them, you wouldn't have like a 1 block meal and then a 10 block meal is kind of what I'm saying there. So that's how you create your structure. So then if you're having, your 10 blocks.
So what does that structure do though? Like,
what does that structure do? That allows you to get a constant delivery of those nutrients into your body. So the key thing in this diet being that the ratio is set. So most diets talk about your overall daily diet of what you have, but they don't get so specific as that at this meal you need to have the same ratio of protein, fat, and carbs.
And why do we need those ratios?
Because that's all coming back to controlling the inflammation and controlling the hormonal mechanisms within your body, because they all work the same all of the time. So it does make sense that you deliver the nutrients the same way. If you're hitting your body more with carbohydrate at one phase, it's creating a whole bunch of different metabolic pathways and processes to happen than if you're giving it the same things all the time. It's like if you put diesel in your car one time and then put petrol in your car the next time, and now your car's going to totally conk out. But you get what I'm saying. Like it performs differently if you, or let's use premium, moderate, and low level fuel. Then potentially it's still going to run, but it's going to run more efficiently on the higher octane, and it's going to run less efficiently on the other. So if you're giving your body the best ratio all the time, then it's constant, then it's not having to use different pathways. Because obviously if you totally take carbohydrate out of your diet, your body switches over to a different way of getting its energy. Like it has to break down different nutrients, different bunch of hormones get released, and a different bunch of metabolic pathways get used. And then if you switch over and you're just having carbohydrates and no proteins or fats and nothing else, then everything changes, and that creates a whole bunch of different byproducts, which creates a whole bunch of different, hormones to get released. And the whole point of this is to keep everything balanced and under control. So even distribution of actual caloric intake and macronutrients, and then a even spacing so that you're not going 10 hours with no food and then putting 3 meals all within 3 hours of each other. So it's about that constant delivery so that you're always got your body in that really harmonious state And as I said, he's worked out through whatever research he's done that is the best ratio to deliver that. And again, if people want to visit his website and go into more detail, I didn't go to that depth of all of the studies, but given that it's 35 years, I know that there's been a lot of work done around that. And then obviously the results of people being able to come off medications for, I'm going to pick on maybe those main things like, cholesterol and diabetes, all the more metabolic type issues that people have where they get impaired glucose metabolism or their cholesterol levels go high, or even just all the word inflammation, which essentially means that something's not working properly, that your body's having to create that inflammatory response to try to balance it off. It's like when you hurt yourself, you tear a muscle, you get inflammation because it's trying to calm that area down. So essentially that's what we know if you've got heart disease and, you've got to, or let's talk about the fatty liver or something like that, where you've got a build up of fat in the liver because of the types of food you've been eating. You want to try to like reverse that and eliminate that type of thing. So as I said, it's probably one of the most scientific type of diets that's out there because it's not just kind of roughly eat this. It's very, very precise in what you eat or how much you eat of something.
Okay. Well, what about the subject of, you're a female bodybuilder and hormones and cycles and things like that. Like how does it affect that side of things? Does it affect it at all?
Well, I don't believe, I should say I would say like everything it regulates, because I know that if you eat a lot of sugar, you tend to sort of suffer exacerbated symptoms, water retention or mood swing, water retention probably being your main one. So with everything, if everything's in balance and in control and not fluctuating with the type of food that you eat, then everything is going to be more simple. Exercise is a whole other, like this is not talking about exercise, this is talking purely about diet. Mm-hmm. So exercise does a whole bunch of other things with, regulating hormones and flattening out those type of issues. Because I know when I was training, I didn't have a lot of fluctuations. Like I know that was because exercise, particularly like heavy weight training, does kind of suppress the estrogen. So the mood swings and all that kind of stuff actually didn't happen.
Cool.
Yeah, like it was actually a very level. But if you are going through that cycle, then yes, you are, and yes, you do experience that. But I think the weight training, to me, like the diet being very constant, the weights being very constant, suffered very, very little of that type of thing. So I actually used to think that hormones weren't real until I stopped competing and realized that, oh God,
yeah,
hormones are real. So I think in terms of I didn't go into the menopausal part of it. I looked at that separately. Like I looked at that as a different, like what are people saying for people who are, trying to regulate menopause hormones or sex hormones in general. And it came back to sugar.
Okay. Processed
food and sugar. So I'm reading this diet. I'm reading this like how to balance your hormones, how to, ease through menopause or how to regulate that. And I was expecting for there to be some kind of magic thing that would be in there saying, okay, this is this magic diet that you follow. And it came back to really should stay away from processed foods and sugars and, eat more of your whole grains. And it wasn't really specifically saying eat high protein or eat high carbohydrate. It was all coming back to balance, which is essentially what the zone diet is. So it wasn't kind of touting any particular diet. It was just kind of say like what type of foods do you eat? How do you eat? And it was talking about obviously having protein and carbohydrate at a meal, having healthy fats. And I'm like, that's that commonality between all of the diets. It's more like you can look at different ratios of nutrients, but at the end of the day, it's the type of food which is way more important than the actual nutrient, I think, because there's such a range and it depends on whether you're an athlete, depends on whether you're obese, depends on whether you have an existing disease state, depends on whether you're going through menopause, depends on how old you're. Like it's so many different things, and one particular set of nutrients may be more appropriate than another. But I think the basis really comes down to the one thing that stood out to me was sugar is so evil. Like it's
more addictive than Coke, right?
More addictive than Coke, I believe. There is some studies out around that, and particularly in children's brains, which is really, really shocking. That if you said, would you consider giving your child cocaine? I think every parent would be absolutely horrified. But if you said, are you okay with your kid having sugar? Oh yeah, it's okay. Like I try to like avoid it, but it's okay because it's, they're kids, they've got to have fun. But I think that we're learning more and more about that now. Sugar's a whole other issue, and we could almost probably do a whole podcast on sugar alone.
And
we will. But I'm just going to say, that's probably, if you wanted to change one thing in your diet that was going to have a massive impact in so many areas, not just in your, weight, because obviously the first thing you think about is sugar is associated with weight gain and fat gain, but it's aging, cancer, there's so many other things that people are associating sugar with that, and we're talking sugar in general, not just refined sugar. If you drink a lot of fruit juice, whilst it's coming from fruit, again, we talked about in one of the other episodes about removing the fiber or how we, destroy the natural form of that. Well, you think about it, fruit eaten as a piece of fruit, whilst there's sugar in there, the way that it delivers to your body is totally different than if you're drinking a fruit juice, which is so much more concentrated. Your ability to drink 250 ml of fruit juice, compared to eating 250 grams of a fruit, and then there's usually all of the fiber and the good stuff's all sucked right out of it because it's just, either reconstituted or, it's got 2% of the named fruit and the rest of it's really apple juice or, it's one of those things where people think that fruit juice is so healthy, but it's really no healthier than, drinking Coca-Cola or drinking a soft drink. So number one takeaway from everything, if you do nothing else right, cut out sugar or reduce it as much as you possibly can. I'm the first person to admit that I'll take sugar over fat any day. I love my sugar.
So will I. But I'll try and make it natural sugars rather than refined.
Yeah, that. Things like your coconut sugars, palm sugars, I'm going to say it wrong, agave, things like that, and rice syrup are definitely going to be better. But you still do have to keep in mind that they are still sugar, and ultimately, it's something that has a very, very small place. But I think, just identifying foods that have a lot of, hidden sugar, and trying to avoid those. And when I say hidden, I'm talking about things like, your good old yogurt. You think yogurt's really healthy, unless you're using one of the ones which is like a diet yogurt, or I think there's some new ones out which is sweetened with stevia. Majority of yogurts, even low-fat yogurts, still have a really high proportion of added sugar. So you just got to watch and really read those labels and look at what's actually coming into your food, based on how much you're going to eat of that food. So that's kind of a whole other segue. But yeah, when it came to looking at the balancing the hormones, the thing that this particular diet or advice that they were talking about was really avoiding those highly processed foods and avoiding sugar, because and to me that I'm looking at it saying, well, that's just a bodybuilding diet. That's just essentially what we do on a day-to-day basis. So no wonder I don't have too many of those kind of issues, and I'm hoping in the next couple of years that continues to be the case, because I do try to follow an overall pretty healthy diet. But as far as the benefits of that particular diet is, I think you're going to have, if everything's level, then everything else that you're doing is going to work better, because it's that consistency. It's like if you sleep consistently, you get a better result. Like if your sleeping patterns are all over the place, you're not going to be performing at your best. If your nutrition is all over the place and your meals are sporadic, one thing that people don't realize is that if you leave too long between a meal and your blood sugar drops, you can actually get very, very emotional. And you feel like the world's going to fall in, and people can kind of get quite teary and upset, and that's where people get cranky. And that's what we talk about low carb diets is essentially, your blood sugar's crashing, and one of the reactions of that is that you get very, very emotional, maybe hysterical. Your partner says something that's just not meant to be offensive, but all of a sudden you take it like that it is. So that kind of impact on that's obviously.
So this diet can save your marriage. That's what you're saying.
I reckon so. The finickiness of having to prepare it might drive them crazy, but I think once you get the hang of it, I think it's it's pretty good, because essentially. I wish this wasn't verbal, because I'm probably a very visual person, and I wish I could kind of put up a diagram and explain how it is. But essentially, once you understand how many blocks you need, you look at, literally they have charts of foods, and it will say this food is, he also ranks it into, as I said, fair, the best food, okay, and then really not a great choice, because as I said, it really comes down to the type of food, like white bread versus a whole grain bread. that comes back to glycemic index. It comes back to the other micronutrients that are in there. It comes back to I guess it's more those other unquantifiable, not phytonutrients and fibers and all those things that are stripped out of the white, highly processed foods, the things that were there in nature, that were there for, I believe, a reason. And if we strip them all out, then, we're kind of losing, I guess, that, the concept that food is medicine, and you just put it and look at it only from from a macronutrient point of view. It's a very, very lopsided view. So yes, it's carbohydrate. Yes, it's providing your body with that fuel, but you're missing out on all of these other things which need to go with it, which overall benefit your health. And I think there's so much still to be quantified, because I think, there's just so many different nutrients and things that someone said that it would take all the scientists in the world, 50 years or something to actually research and find out about all these things. So there's still so much that we don't know, but what we do know is that what's mostly naturally in there. Obviously, there are some anti-nutritional properties, so don't think that all just because it's natural it's good. There are some things in nature which are obviously poisonous and dangerous and lock up nutrients and all that kind of thing. But overall, you want to take it in its kind of its whole and more natural form, rather than stripping it out and isolating it back, particularly around that sort of carbohydrate type of thing. So if you're bringing in the bran and you're bringing in all the vitamin E that comes with that and all the zinc and the different nutrients that are sitting in that component, and if you just leave the starch, it pretty much kind of has nothing. So that's when people talk about refined and processed. It's just stripped out all the good stuff and given you the part which is probably desirable from a taste point of view and desirable from an energy point of view, but then the negative impact of that is that your body wasn't supposed to take it in like that. So that's just kind of breaking it down like that. So
you mentioned that you're a visual person and there's charts. Where can people actually download these visuals or charts and these indexes of the different foods?
Yeah, well, I think it is just called zonediet.com. He's actually got a download that he hasn't put his website on, which is very interesting. But I just went to, thezonediet.com, I think it was.
Yep.
And I think, obviously you have to put your email in to get the downloadable. So it talks about the food blocks, and it says, this is the most precise way to get into the zone. There's a visual of what it looks like. So there's some little bit of oil on the plate, a little bit of chicken and all the vegetables. So you can see, so just to give you a description, it's obviously showing that the main proportion of the plate is made up of a lot of vegetable matter, small amount of protein, and a very small amount of healthy fat. So again, with every food group, he does categorize whether it's a good source of it. So when it's a good source of it, obviously go to that the most. Go to kale. So even he'll say any kind of more complex type dense carbohydrate food is to be used less. However, if you need to eat 3 blocks of food and it takes 6.5 cups of bok choy to get you 1 block, I can guarantee you nobody's eating 3 blocks of bok choy. So there has to be that balance. So you might make up your 3 blocks coming from some bok choy, a little bit of your whole grain bread, but you'll find that the serving for that might be 30 grams. So it's not a whole slice of bread. So it's putting that into context and understanding that just because the manufacturer made a serving 1 slice, that's actually what you need. And that's something that I was chatting about with you before we started the podcast, Ash, was obviously when I was a kid, a slice of bread was maybe 8 centimetres by 8 centimetres. Now they're damn near the size of an A4 piece of paper. So 1 sandwich is about 10 sandwiches now. So, that's because, that's more appealing to the consumer to see this big piece of bread. Do you actually need that? No, you probably need about 3/4 of a slice of bread for your carbohydrate. So when people say, oh, carbs are bad or this is bad, it's no, the quantity that you're eating is bad and you need to relook at what you need to eat and eat what you need to eat. But then, the hunger and the satiety comes into it. So nobody's probably going to be satisfied with 3/4 of a piece of bread for their sandwich. But if you load it up with salad and balance it out with leafy green vegetables and other more desirable foods off the, the carbohydrate chart, then suddenly your meal becomes more attractive. And that's, I say, that's kind of essentially the way that diet works. If you're going for your oils, you're not going to be going for highly saturated fats. It's definitely your your monounsaturated fats, nuts. But I know we've talked about this before too, Ash. Like you can't go have 100 grams of nuts. If you're talking about 1.5 grams of fat, you're probably talking about like half an ounce or something like that, which is like 15 grams, and that's maybe 3 blocks of that. But I've got all the charts here, so people do want to go to his website because he talks more about there's 2 supplements that he believes are really important. It's omega fats and polyphenols, which again antioxidants, and again the omega fats work against inflammation. So his diet is very much around controlling the hormones that cause inflammation within the body.
What hormones are affected by exercise?
I'm glad you asked that, Ash, because we do talk about hormones a lot. And again, there's so many different hormones, and it's also what type of exercise. And that's still being researched, to be quite honest. So I looked into this because I like to check my facts and not just speak off the cuff, even though a lot of what I know is through personal experience and through research that I've done years ago, but I like to try to keep current. And I found one study that said exercise improves insulin sensitivity.
Right, okay.
But it didn't say what type of exercise. So was it cardio? Was it weight training? How long was it for? What did it do? But in general, I obviously delve further, but exercise in general, any type of exercise does help improve insulin sensitivity. So coming back to, again, modern diseases and type 2 diabetes being so prevalent because of, people, what we've not done. So what we've not done physically, what we've been sedentary, and what we've chosen to eat, high sugar diets, high fat diets, low nutrient dense foods. People kind of accept that, okay, that's now my lot in life. I've turned whatever age and I now have been diagnosed with this. Exercise can help reverse that and control it as much as what medication can. So I think for people who've got into that lifestyle and discovered now that they have to take insulin or have to really control their diet, they really need to start looking at exercise as a complement to that. Like diet is one part of the puzzle, but exercise can't be, it's not an either or. And a lot of that does come up a lot, like, is it diet or exercise? No, it's both. It's always both. And the older we get, the more important that exercise is. So that can actually help to reverse a lot of these metabolic problems is simply by moving your body and getting active. Now, so I got cardio, for example. I looked at cardio, and cardio changes a whole bunch of different hormones to what resistance training does. So this is why you need to do both as well. Like you can't just do your cardio, you can't just do your weight training. Mm-hmm. You have to do both.
Yep.
And now I'm kind of like getting into that whole concept of the hybrid of those two, which is, I call it my weights cardio, where you're using a certain amount of resistance but still in a cardio form. So it's not pure cardio and it's not pure resistance. It's a hybrid in between, and that's obviously going to have a whole different bunch of hormones that
So when you're talking about a hybrid in between, are you sort of measuring that based on heart rate or
more activity. So so yes, heart rate, but I don't really go out and measure my heart rate because I don't like to get fixated on that component. I like to kind of more get fixated on my breathing, my body's movement. If I'm weight training, I actually kind of use that as my meditation in a way because it's like a repetitive movement, and again breathing comes into it, and it's a focus thing, like it's that mind muscle connection. So I'm in different mind zone when I'm weight training, and then I'm in different mind zone when I'm doing my intensity. So what I mean by that is, like, if you're going to do a purely cardio activity, you're going to go a certain speed and I guess a certain intensity, and as soon as you add weight to that, your speed is going to slow down. And then looking at it from the weights point of view, if you do a heavy weight, it's going to slow down even further. But if you're doing a really lightweight, then you can do it a lot faster than what you could do your 2-plate bench. If you normally bench with 2 plates aside and someone puts half a plate aside on it, you can rep that out probably 4 times faster than what you could do your bench press. But it's different to if you were just like, no one's going to lay on a bench and just like pump their arms without a weight in it, which would kind of be the cardio version of doing that. So it fits in between of those two, where you're using lighter weight than what you would for pure strength training, but you're actually using resistance, which you don't generally use in cardio training,
right?
Like not overall body. So you are incorporating weights into it. So whether it be, dumbbell, like a battle ropes would be an example where that's a certain amount of resistance, or you might be doing a really fast shoulder press. So you are doing some weights movements, but you're doing them in a much faster fashion. So to me, that's a hybrid. And that's it's incorporating a whole lot of different fitness components, but it also initiates a whole lot of different hormonal responses when you do that. So as I said, it's early days in studies and I don't think anything's really conclusive yet, but just coming back to the hormones that they do know, obviously adrenaline gets pumped out when you exercise because your body's thinking that it has to go and like fight or prepare for something, but that's not going to be, well, I guess, depending on how heavy the weight is and coming back to weights, there's also degrees of whether you're doing 1 rep maximums or whether you're doing, bodybuilding style training. But yeah, adrenaline, insulin, dopamine, which obviously decreases stress, are sort of the more commonly known results of exercise. But I did a little bit of research and there's a hormone called FGF21, which is called the metabolic hormone. And so it helps to improve diabetes and reduce obesity. And that actually showed that when people did cardio training versus resistance training, that was increased so much more with the cardio training. So the impact on your metabolism of this particular metabolic hormone wasn't as great in resistance training as what it was with cardio training. So that's really interesting. So that's something where if you're trying to control your diabetes and obesity and those kind of metabolic problems that people have had from, years of, I guess, eating the wrong food and not being active, then they're going to get a really big kick out of starting some cardio work to help control that. Another one which they looked at was FGF19, and that's a type of growth hormone. And it actually was higher in cardio than what it was in resistance training. But then they said, okay, but that was 4 hours after the exercise was done. So I guess what I'm saying here is there's so much that we still don't know as to what's happening, because what happened at half an hour was it peaked up higher, because you would expect that a hormone that's relating to muscle growth would somehow be more present in a resistance training session than a cardio session, because we all know that if you do no resistance training and only cardio, you will not become a mega bodybuilder.
Yeah.
So that I don't think we need any more research to kind of prove that, weight training causes muscle growth as opposed to cardio training if you do one or the other. So the fact that they've done this study and they found this impact on the hormones is like they themselves said, we there's so much more work to be done here. There's still a lot to be done. But this is interesting when it comes to the hormones. So when it comes to, I think it was resistance exercise that I was talking about, the decreased estrogen. So it does actually depress the estrogen, as we talked about. So in postmenopausal women, the risk of breast cancer can be reduced where they do exercise 5 times a week. It's actually more effective than a low-fat diet. Okay. So that's an anti-cancer, that's what exercise can do for you. So diet and that together is going to be so much more powerful. But this is, for me personally, I believe that, women generally, particularly, now postmenopausal, are going to be from, my generation or a little bit older. And exercise was kind of seen as a masculine thing or seen as something that women just didn't do. And I think that this is showing that, no, it's a human need, male or female. We need to exercise. We need to keep our bodies moving. And to me, to have something that can help decrease the risk of cancer by a more effective than low-fat diet to decrease that risk of cancer by having that suppression of the estrogen is really, really important. So that was a really interesting thing that came out, that it's also, as I said, the age that you are impacts what hormones are being affected. Obviously with growth hormone release, which again, that's associated with exercise, it's related to the intensity. So the higher the intensity, the more your body is putting out there. Like we know that there's hormones impacted, but it's like the more they get into it, the more that they realize that there's more to learn. But just, main take out of that for me was the insulin sensitivity. That's probably the most important thing, where people can actually reverse a problem. Like they can actually improve a situation where they've got into. And if you don't have that problem and you're exercising, then you're going to, I guess, reduce the chance of actually having an issue with it. And then for women, that decreasing the estrogen once they're postmenopausal, and helping with that risk of cancer. And that's probably, like, to me, a bigger demographic of people that are training that need to be. So I guess if anyone's got a partner or a wife or someone who's in that age bracket, and they themselves exercising and their partner doesn't, that it would be a really good thing to encourage them to get into it for those health benefits, because I know I would certainly choose moving over having to take medication or risking a disease. And if someone said it was that easy that I just had to get out and do a bit of exercise, I would definitely take that over going down the other path. But exercise and diet together both obviously impact on hormones, and you can control and improve the situation. And I think it just goes to show that any form of exercise is beneficial, but different forms have different impacts, and it's something that we still need to learn a lot more about.
And you find that this zone diet in particular is really good for balancing everything.
I believe so, and I believe it's also just how he focuses on the type of food. Like, as I said, I'm a big believer in balance. I'm a big believer in, the meal structure that he uses is very compatible with how I have already thought. And for those same reasons of wanting to always have that constant delivery of nutrients into the body so that your body knows what it's getting, and it doesn't have to be switching all over the place from one mechanism to another mechanism. And then, the actual...
That's a bit like our mind in some ways. Someone walks into the office or whatever and distracts you from what you're doing. It takes you a long time just to get in the different modes. So the body you're saying the body kind of reacts in that way as well, between switching up foods and...
Like the body will switch and adapt, but I think as you get older, it's less adept at doing that.
Right.
Because it will, like if you put it into one state, it'll naturally flick over to the other. But this is what we're talking about with your metabolic disorders. That basically means that your body doesn't react as quickly as what it did.
Mm-hmm.
Or it doesn't react at all, or it doesn't recognize those things that it's supposed to. So when you are young, it's really great at and same thing, okay, you're paying attention to one thing, someone says something, you can pay attention to the next thing. And I think the same thing as we get older, we find it harder to switch and focus between one thing to the next thing. So it's exactly the same inside the body. And that's that thing where it becomes more and more a problem as you get older, and that's why you need to look after it more.
You lose momentum, but this is the sort of thing where that momentum just carries all the way through.
Yeah.
Cool.
But the type, everything, whether it's this particular food structure, everything that I've looked at, there is that common agreement of the less processed food is better.
Yeah.
That's if nobody agrees on the exact ratios of your macronutrients, they agree on what type of food it should be coming from.
Cool. Fascinating stuff, Christine. Thank you very much.
No problem, Ash. Always a pleasure to talk about this.
Cool. And once again, listeners, please, if you've got any questions, please write your comments below, wherever below is, however you're listening to this podcast. But and also we've got Aussie Muscle Guru Facebook group that you can join. You can join that, and that is a private little group where you can throw out questions that we may just answer on these podcasts. Thanks very much for listening. Words of wisdom. If you like what you've heard, recognize that these tips, they're free. So show your support by becoming a loyal international protein customer by jumping online, hunt our product down, and hit that buy now button. So once again, like, share, and subscribe to our podcast so we can continue to bring you these episodes from our one and only Aussie Muscle Guru, 3 times world champion, Christine Enville.